This slide, I'm gonna show you guys some advanced configuration for the SSL VPN, which including the basic SSL VPN settings, the resource list, the U-key based SSL VPN, which is used for two-factor authentication, and also the host compliance binding, and also the host check by using the SSL VPN. First of all, I'm going to review the basic SSL VPN configurations that we mentioned during the HCSA course. So first of all, we can just easily follow the configuration wizard for the SSL VPN. So first of all, you need to configure for the SSL VPN name and also assign the AA server. You can use your local server as the authentication server, or you can use the third party. You can use the third party one. And then you need to configure for the interface, which including the access interface. So access interface is the interface that used to respond the request from the SSL VPN client. So that is the egress interface, or your one interface in firewall. If you have two links to access to internet, we support to set two egress interface. And the service port here is the port that we used for the SSL VPN connections. You can use the default number, or you can change for other ports. And then you need to add both tunnel interface and address pool. So tunnel interface is the interface that used as the gateway for remote users. You need to assign the interface IP for this tunnel interface. And then you need to add one address pool that used to distribute the IP address to the remote user, as long as the remote user successfully passed the VPN authentication. So both IP must in the same network segment, but without overlapping. So that means tunnel interface IP cannot be included in the address pool. Then you can also set for some specific parameters for the SSL, including the secret key. You can change the SSL version that used for the VPN encryption, and also the port number. You can change the port number for the data transfer. So this is for UDP communication. After the SSL connection, you will use the UDP service to transfer the data. So you can change the port. And this is the configuration for the tunnel interface. As I mentioned, you need to specify for the IP address of this tunnel interface and must in the same network segment with the address pool. So this IP will be used as the gateway IP for the remote users. And this is the configuration for the address pool. So you are able to configure for an IP range. So the SSL VPN server will distribute the IP from this list and assign to the remote user. You can also add the DNS server and Win server. In this case, the firewall will assign both the IP with the DNS server and Win server to the remote user. After that, you need to create the tunnel route. You need to create the tunnel route for the SSL VPN connection. So this is your gateway IP. This is your gateway IP. And also the policy. In this case, we bind the tunnel interface to the zone VPN hub. So you need to allow the connection from the VPN zone, to the internal server zone, to your internal server zone. In this case, after the remote user successfully connected through the VPN, they are able to access to your internal resources or to your internal systems. Resource list. Resource list is the function that we can pre-config for some system list in the firewall. In this case, after the remote user successfully accessed to the firewall, they will be automatically popped up with the resource list to the user. The user can easily access to their internal systems by clicking this URL, from the resource list. Here is one example how to config for the resource list. So you can add the resource list, and here is the resource configurations. So you can specify for the system name and also the URL for this server or for the specific system, and add it to the resource list. Besides that, we also support to distribute the resource list to different user group. So that means the user group based resource list. So we can create for some user group, and then you can use the binding resource to binding the resource list for different user group. In this case, the users that from different departments, they may have different resource list that to access to different systems that they may need to use. For example, for this financial department, they may need to access to some financial system. For the HR department, they may need to access to some HR used systems. So in this case, we can differentiate the resource list to different user group. And after, as I mentioned, after you have configured for the resource list feature, as long as the remote user successfully passed the authentication, there will be one pop-up through the browser that to show the whole resource list that distributed to this user, and then you can easily access to some of the URLs, to some of the internal system. So that is the resource list. Our SSL VPN can support the two-factor authentication by combining both credential authentication and also other features, including the USB key, the SMS authentication, and also Google Authenticator. So we support multiple solutions for the 2FA. In this case, we will show you one scenario that use the U-key, the U-key or digital certificate to do the 2FA for SSL VPN connection. The certificate authentication including two different solutions. So one is the hardware U-key based certificate authentication. If you use the U-key for the SSL VPN 2FA, so you need to configure the standard SSL VPN instance by using the authentication of the username and password, and then you need to apply for the CA certificate from the CA and export both CA certificate and also client certificate from the CA. And then in the firewall, you need to create a PKI trust domain, and then you need to import this CA root certificate to the firewall, and added the SSL VPN instance to enable the 2FA authentication, combining both the certificate and the credential Then you need to import the client certificate to the U-key, to the USB key, USB token, and also set the pin for the U-key. Finally, you need to access through the SSL VPN client. You need to change the authentication mode to the user password together with the digital certificate, and plugging the U-key to the computer and select the certificate from the list. And another one is using digital certificate authentication for the 2FA. You need to import the client certificate to the web browser of the PC. And other configurations is the same. So in this case, the certificate-based authentication for 2FA can support for both digital and also hardware U-key, hardware token authentication. So let's have a look how to create the 2FA. First of all, you need to have the generated certificates from the CA for both client certificate and also the root certificate. After that, you need to import, as I mentioned, you need to import the root certificate, CA certificate to the firewall trusted domain, and then you need to go back to the SSL VPN instance. There's the tag called client. The client certificate authentication, you need to enable the certificate authentication, and then change the authentication to the user password together with the digital certificate, and then select the trusted domain that we imported with the original root CA, and add to the trust domain list. After that, you need to config for the U-key. We had a U-key administrative tool, which is called Hailstone U-key admin. After you install this, you can plug in the U-key to your computer and import the client certificate to the U-key. And also you need to set for the pin. After that, we already finished all the configuration for the 2FA digital certificate together with the logging. So in the SSL VPN client, we need to change the authentication mode to the user password with the digital certificate, and then you can select the certificate from the list. You need to plug in the USB key to your computer, and then you will find the certificate that's stored in USB key. That's stored in USB key. And then you also need to fill with the correct username, password, and also the UKey pin to access to the SSL VPN server. That is the 2FA by using the certificate, As I mentioned, we also support other 2FA for SSL VPN, including the SMS. So we support both SMS gateway or SMS modem. So you can find some third-party SMS modem to send the SMS message to the mobile phone for 2FA authentication. Or we also support to integrate together with the Google Authenticator tool to use the digital PIN that automatically changed during the time period together with the credential to support the 2FA. So we have different solutions for 2FA, just for your information. And additionally, we also support for some host binding and host check through the SSL VPN. What is host binding? So in the SSL VPN, we can use the host binding to authenticate the host, which is the VPN client. So once the SSL client log into the server, the client will collect those information, including the PC running status, the mainboard serial number, hardware serial number, the CPU ID, and also the BIOS serial number. And we use this MD5 algorithm to generate a 32-bit string, which we called the host ID. Then the client will send this host ID with the username and the password together to the server for authentication. That is the host binding. If you want to enable this function, so under the SSL VPN configuration, there is a host compliance check and binding feature. So you can enable the host binding under the host binding feature. And you can also enable the automatically add the user ID to the binding list, at the first login. And there is the way how to enable this host binding feature through the command line. And another feature is the host check, which can help to check the security status of the remote user, of the remote host that going to connect through the SSL VPN client. So according to the check result, the server side will determine the security level for each of the hosts and assigning the corresponding resource access permission based on the security level. The checked items, including the operating system, the IE version, and also the installation of some specific softwares. Currently, this host check only support the SSL client that installed in Windows. And then you can also check for some other process, including this file path, the running process, the installed services or running services for the host check. Here are some commonly used debug command for the SSL VPN. You can use show tunnel Ssl VPN to check the whole instance information, and show Ssl VPN client to check the online client information, and use show Ssl VPN session to check all the HTTP session information that the browser site that visiting through the Ssl VPN. And show auth user Ssl VPN will give you the online client information of all the SSL VPN instance. And those are some commonly used debug for the SSL VPN. So you can debug Ssl VPN error. You can debug for the event. You can also add some filter for the Ssl VPN debug, or you can debug the packet or the IP address. So that is the